They tied her to a billboard and wrote "on sale." No one stopped to look, except one human. They didn't chain her to hide her. They chained her so everyone could see. She sat beneath the fractured ribcage of a long-dead billboard, lit by a failing neon pulse that flickered in 4 languages. "On sale," it said. The words stuttered across the rusted metal above her, each blink casting her in a sickly glow before plunging her back into half-shadow. Blue skin, long, red hair like flowing copper in the windless air. She wasn't slumped. She wasn't crying. She sat perfectly upright, bound at the wrists and waist by ornamental chain links polished just enough to catch the light. Her eyes were open, fixed on the horizon beyond the bridge, as if waiting for a signal only she could hear. Kane stood frozen, half hidden behind the warped arch of a fallen transit rail. He had come here following a sound, a resonance too clean for wind and too sorrowful to be machinery. His harmonic receiver had caught it, just a tremble of tonal variance in the static, but it had drawn him anyway. He hadn't expected a person. Certainly not her. The city of Oasis Vetra had been dead a long time. Not in the catastrophic sense. There were still lights, systems that flickered to life when coaxed, but spiritually. No more choirs in the cathedral domes. No more tonal bridges or echo sanctuaries. Just rust, dust, and the hum of slow collapse. And yet here she was. Not a ghost. Not a trick of refracted light. Flesh and breath. He took a cautious step forward, boots barely whispering against the powdered mosaic tiles. The beam above her groaned in rhythm with the billboard's light, and for one brief second, the world paused. Light on, her face illuminated. Light off, a statue lost to time. Her eyes shifted, not startled, just aware. She tracked his approach like a mirror does movement. Detached, watchful, as if she'd long stopped expecting mercy and was simply noting his presence for the record. Kane spoke first, voice low and even. "Are you alive?" A blink. Then, calmly, alive enough to answer. Her voice didn't match the image. It was steady, precise, like someone trained for negotiation or ritual. Not a plea, not a performance. Just the truth, stated plainly. "Do you need help?" he asked. Another pause. "Would it change anything if I said yes?" He glanced at the glowing sign above her. His jaw tightened. "Maybe," he said. She tilted her head. Not mockery, not curiosity, more like fatigue pressing against civility. He moved closer, slowly, keeping his hands visible. She didn't recoil, but he noticed the minute tension in her arms, like a string pulled taut. Her wrists bore no fresh blood, but the skin beneath the decorative shackles was worn, the kind of abrasion that came from time, not struggle. "Who left you here?" he asked, crouching down. It didn't leave me," she said. "They placed me. And this." He gestured to the sign. "A warning," she replied. "Or perhaps a receipt." He studied the inscription. "On sale. Not wanted. Not lost. Sale." A transaction frozen mid-step. "You're not merchandise," he muttered. "No longer," she said. "I was considered aesthetic surplus with depreciated trade value." The words used were disposed discreetly. Kane swallowed hard. She noticed. Of course she did. "Are you going to unchain me?" she asked. "Or just stare until I expire?" There was no venom in her tone. Just the dry, tired cadence of someone who had run out of dignity to lose. He unhooked the arc cutter from his belt. The chains weren't heavy duty. Why would they be? She was never meant to fight. Just to sit, still and decorative like a living exhibit. One flick of the tool, and the wrist clamps snapped open with a soft hiss. She didn't move. Even after the last shackle fell, she remained seated, eyes forward, posture unchanging. Kane offered a worn thermal blanket. She accepted it in silence, wrapping it tightly around her shoulders, not out of modesty, but as if the warmth itself might vanish if she didn't hold it close enough. "My place isn't far," he said, standing. "I can offer food. Heat. It's not much, but—" She rose unsteadily to her feet. Her legs trembled, knees slow to unlock. She didn't stumble. She corrected herself mid-waver, spine straightening until she looked taller than she was. "I'll walk," she said. They didn't speak much on the way back. The city loomed around them, its domes cracked open to the stars, once mirrored halls reduced to scaffolding and silent monuments. In the far distance, a rail cart clicked somewhere in the dark, half-sentient automation still going through the motions of a world that had moved on. Kane's shelter was a sound lab buried beneath a former echo chamber, a cavernous sublevel once used for acoustic testing. Now it housed a low mattress, a salvaged heating coil, instruments laid out like surgical tools, and a water rig built from 3 different civilizations' parts. He gestured for her to sit wherever she wished. She chose the corner farthest from the entry, curling onto the floor with her knees drawn up under the blanket, eyes tracking every inch of the room. Kane busied himself making stew, dried ration packs cut with synth oil, and a few withered herbs from his hydro box. He kept one eye on her. She hadn't spoken since they left the billboard. When he offered her a bowl, she hesitated. Hands hovered near it. Then she took it, both hands gripping too tightly. The first bite made her eyes widen. She coughed, then covered her mouth quickly, as if the reaction might cost her something. "You're safe here," Kane said gently. "I won't touch you. Not unless you ask." She glanced up, something like confusion in her eyes. "No one ever said that before," she murmured, not without meaning something else. He didn't respond, just sat across from her and began eating. After the third spoonful, her hand stopped shaking. Her breath grew slower. She didn't finish the bowl, but she held it in her lap like a warm stone. "You're not from here," she said at last. "No," he replied. "Then why did you stop?" He met her gaze. "Because everyone else didn't." She didn't smile, but something behind her eyes shifted, a hairline crack in the mask of indifference. He stood, pulled a second thermal tarp from the storage trunk, and handed it to her without comment. She took it, layered it over the first, then lowered herself onto the floor again. Not on the mattress, just near it. When he dimmed the lights, she didn't close her eyes, but she curled tighter, her breathing softer, more human than it had sounded all evening. Kane lay on his side, listening to the station's old bones hum and creak. He didn't know her name, didn't know what caste or species she belonged to, but the way she held that bowl, like it might vanish, the way she watched the door even after it was locked. He knew one thing. No one should have had to sit under a billboard like that. Not for being beautiful, not for being forgotten. And no one should ever be on sale. He closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come easy. Not anymore. Not since that last performance. But maybe this was the first note of something different. Maybe silence wasn't the end. Maybe it was the start of a song no one had written yet. The first light in Elweiss's Vetra didn't rise so much as flicker. A dying relay in the upper dome hummed itself awake, sending pale pulses of artificial mourning through the cracked skylights. It wasn't warm. It wasn't natural. But it was enough to remind you that you were still alive. Kane sat up slowly, breath clouding faintly in the cold air. The stone floor beneath him radiated chill through his spine, and somewhere nearby, metal creaked, an old panel expanding with the shift in power flow. The kind of sound he was used to cataloging, dying notes of a once great city still trying to breathe. Then he heard her, not moving, not speaking, just breathing, slow and steady, the way someone breathes when they're pretending to be asleep, unsure if the world around them is real yet. She was curled in the corner where she'd slept, wrapped tight in 2 overlapping thermal blankets, like she was afraid warmth would evaporate if she didn't anchor it to her skin. Her red hair had come loose during the night, tangles fanned across the stone like spilled copper. Even with her eyes closed, she looked prepared, as though any sudden noise might trigger a silence too deep to escape from. Kay moved carefully, not quite out of fear, but out of respect. He crossed the room to the heating rig and reset the coil. It hummed to life with a reluctant groan. Behind him, her voice came, low and deliberate. "You walk like someone carrying guilt." He didn't turn right away. The voice was different than last night, less cautious, more assessing. "You're awake," he said. "I never slept." That made him pause. He looked back at her. Her eyes were open now, watching him with an expression too old for her face. I listened to your city, she said. It doesn't sing anymore. Kane sat near the heater and adjusted the temperature. No, he said. It forgot how. She didn't speak again, just pulled the blankets closer. Her posture hadn't changed since the billboard. Not rigid, exactly, but calculated. Like every movement was measured against some unseen rulebook. I'll make something hot, he offered. She nodded once, permission granted, not thanks. He prepped the morning stew the way he always did. Dried root slabs, powdered broth, and a few darkened leaves from his hydrocrate. It wasn't elegant, but it had warmth and salt. He stirred in silence. Laya, she said suddenly. He glanced back. What? My name. He let the name settle between them. Laya, he repeated. She didn't smile, but her shoulders lowered half a breath. You didn't ask, she added. I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me. That's not how most men speak to things they think they've rescued. I didn't rescue you, he said. I just didn't walk past. That seemed to land. Her gaze lingered on him a second longer before drifting to the heating coil. She extended one hand slowly, fingers trembling as they approached the warmth. Her skin, pale blue with faint violet undertones, looked raw in the cold, thin patches at the knuckles and palms where the shackles had rubbed her down. Kane ladled stew into 2 ceramic cups and crossed the space between them. He handed her one without touching her hand. Her fingers hovered over it. She sniffed first, then took it. The moment the heat touched her skin, her breath hitched. She lowered her eyes and brought the cup close to her lips, cautious but eager. Her first sip was so small he barely saw her swallow. The second came quicker. She didn't choke this time, but her throat moved like it wanted to. The steam curled around her face. What is this? She asked. Earth root. Filter broth. Some local leaf I can't pronounce. It's hot. That's the best part. She nodded. Do you know how long it's been, she said, since something was made for me, not through me? He didn't answer. They used to say I was valuable, she went on, voice distant. My posture, my face, my silence, all useful, decorative. I was presented like a treaty ornament. My value was in standing beside someone more important than I'd ever be. Kane listened, not like a confessor, not like a savior, just a man who knew that sometimes the best music was played without instruments. They didn't hit me, she said. They didn't need to. They erased me with politeness. She looked at the stew again. And when I aged half a cycle, they called me non-resaleable material and removed me from the registry. They left you on display, Kane said, not as a question. She blinked slowly. It wasn't for punishment. It was for clearance. The words lodged in his chest like a shard of ice. He looked at her now, not the elegance, not the beauty, but the quiet endurance that refused to shatter. She wasn't broken, but she had been filed away like dust. I make things, he said softly. Or I used to. Music mostly. Soundscapes. Harmonics. I thought I could turn pain into something beautiful. I was wrong. What happened? She asked, her eyes not leaving him. He gave her a long look. I composed a piece that triggered memory collapse. It was supposed to help with grief. Instead, people cracked. Some never recovered. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Laya stared at him, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. They used to say I was good for making others comfortable, she said. But no one ever asked what comfort meant to me. There was a long silence. Kane handed her a cloth square and gestured to her hands. You're trembling. She looked down as though noticing it for the first time. The cup had long since emptied, but she was still holding it like it might vanish if she let go. She took the cloth, wiped her fingers one by one with care. Then, slowly, she set the cup aside. I want to move, she said. Today. He tilted his head. Move. I can't sit anymore. Not for another hour. Not after last night. You haven't eaten enough, he said. You haven't rested. Maybe not, she said, but I've been still too long. My body needs to remember what living feels like. Kane studied her. There was steel under the softness now. Not defiance, something quieter. A kind of reclamation. Just the outer corridor, she added. I'll follow your pace. He stood, walked to the far wall, and retrieved a pair of insulated wraps. old but intact. He handed her one. She took it with both hands, folding it over her legs before standing. Her body swayed slightly, knees locking too early, but she adjusted fast. Kane didn't offer his arm. She didn't ask. Outside, the corridor was lit in dull orange from the emergency grid, long strips of faded plastic lights trailing like veins along the ceiling. The air smelled of coolant and rust. She kept pace with him, one careful step at a time. Her breathing stayed even, but her eyes drank in everything. The shadows, the cracked panels, the layered graffiti that read like a lost city's final journal. "You came here to be forgotten too?" she asked. Ken didn't stop walking. "No, I came to remember without hurting anyone." They reached a maintenance port, half open and spewing mist from an overworked pipe. Kane checked the pressure valve, made a note on his wristpad. Laya watched in silence. Then, softly, "Thank you." He turned. "For what?" "For giving me something useless," she said. "Warmth." Silence. A place to sit without being seen as for sale. He nodded once. Not out of pride, just acknowledgement. "I'm not sure what I'm giving you in return," she added. "You don't have to give me anything." She looked at him a long time. "That's what makes it different." They walked back in silence. But something had changed. Not in the city. Not in the walls. In the space between two people who had stopped being passengers in their own stories. And in that space, barely audible, nearly drowned by ruin, something like music had started to breathe again. The corridor whispered behind them as they stepped back inside. Not with voices or ghosts, just the old language of forgotten circuitry and aging metal breathing under strain. Every inch of L.Y.'s Vetra felt alive in the way a nearly drowned man still twitches in reflex. Not dead, not yet, but close. Laya paused just past the threshold, one hand still lightly resting on the doorframe. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from effort. The short walk had clearly taxed her more than she let on. She refused help. Kane had offered her his arm once, halfway back, but she'd only answered with a look that said, "Don't make me say no out loud." He didn't ask again. Now, she leaned against the wall with all the grace of someone pretending not to. Her chest rose in shallow breaths. Kane could hear the tremor just beneath her silence, like a string stretched too tight across a frame. She wasn't breaking, but her balance was delicate. "I'll get water," he said, voice low. She didn't respond. Not with words, just a nod. Kane turned toward the back of the sound chamber and retrieved a flask from the dehumidifier unit. The tap hissed faintly as filtered moisture flowed out, collecting into a metal cup. The scent of rust had faded over time, replaced by the mineral neutrality of engineered water. He returned and handed it to her. She drank slowly, smaller sips than before, more deliberate. When she was done, she handed it back with both hands, like returning something sacred. "It's strange," she said quietly, "to be tired from walking, but not afraid." He watched her, uncertain if he should answer. She glanced up. "The places I walked before, they weren't mine. I didn't know what my steps meant, or what they were supposed to signal to others. Here it's just ground, just stone. That's all it ever was," Kane said. People just kept pretending it meant more. She eased down onto the edge of the mattress. Not a collapse, more like an experiment. Testing softness, testing trust. The way her body settled said more than her words had all morning. Kane sat across from her on the floor, adjusting the portable amplifier he'd scavenged last week. Its interface flickered to life, spitting out faint static. He turned the dial until the pitch shifted into something almost harmonic, a remnant tone still echoing from the dome's acoustic panels. "You work with sound?" Laya said, her voice softer now. "Worked," he corrected. Past tense. "What is that?" He turned the dial again, slowing the modulation until a single note emerged, a hollow, mournful hum vibrating through the floor. "Residual resonance," he said. Every dome was built with its own tonal code. Back when this city still believed sound had structure. She tilted her head. Structure. Each building was tuned to a different frequency. Some harmonized across sectors. Some were meant to disrupt. It was music, but also navigation, mood control, even crowd management. Laya stared at the ceiling, eyes following the faint lines in the stone. And now it's just echo. Forgotten instructions bouncing off broken walls. She nodded, absorbing it. Kane studied her profile in the flickering light. The violet tone of her skin had warmed slightly since their walk. Her hair had begun to dry at the edges, curling naturally in a way she clearly hadn't allowed it to do in a long time. She no longer looked like a statue someone forgot to dust. She looked real, present. You said something yesterday, Kane said, about being removed from inventory. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink, just answered. I was part of a diplomatic bond program, she said. Ornaments for trade officials, each assigned to a representative based on visual and genetic compatibility. We learned silence, poise, beauty. We were not owned a name, but we had no signatures, no decisions. When our patrons fell, we were redistributed or archived. Archived, Kane repeated. It sounds better than thrown away, she said, tone dry. He let the silence sit. She reached out, almost absently, and touched the amplifier casing. The hum beneath her fingers shifted slightly, just enough to register. She froze. That's new, she whispered. Kane nodded. It responds to conductive skin contact. You changed the current. Her hand remained still on the device, eyes wide. I changed it. Yes. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then her lips parted almost involuntarily, and she sang, not loudly, not even musically, just one sustained tone. A vocalization pulled from memory, like an echo of a childhood lullaby or an ancestral chant long buried. The amplifier pulsed. The note vibrated through the chamber walls, soft and low, then climbed into the space like light through fog. Kane didn't touch anything, didn't interfere. He watched. Her voice wasn't perfect. It cracked once near the end, but it held. It endured. When she stopped, the silence didn't return harshly. It came gently like dusk. Laya opened her eyes. They shimmered, not with tears, but with astonishment, as if she hadn't realized sound could still come from her, as if she'd been convinced her voice was part of what had been stripped away. Kane offered nothing. No praise, no analysis, just presence. She looked at him then, and for the first time, not as an unknown, not as a strange male in a ruin, but as a witness. That wasn't for performance, she said. It was for me. I know. Her breath hitched slightly, then steadied. He stood and moved to the far wall, retrieved a second blanket from the supply crate, and tossed it toward her feet. She picked it up, this time with less hesitation, and folded it over her lap. You're letting me take space, she said. Yes. Why? Because you needed it. She looked down at the fabric in her lap, then back at him. That's not logical. No, he agreed. It's human. That silenced her more than anything he'd said before. Not wounded silence. Not programmed deference. Just quiet. Thoughtful. Kane sat again. The amplifier still pulsed faintly beside them. In the background, Elyas's Vetra creaked. Somewhere, above their heads, one of the tuning bridges groaned as a cold current passed through. A harmonic vibration echoed faintly down the stairwell. Off-key, irregular but alive. Laya turned toward the sound, listening not like someone trained to judge pitch, but like someone feeling something for the first time. And Kane, without moving, without speaking, knew something irreversible had happened. She had sung, not for an audience, not for validation, for herself. In a city built for echoes, something new had entered the air. Not just noise, not just memory, choice, voice, presence. And for the first time in far too long, neither of them felt alone in it. The city was quieter that night, as if it too were listening. The broadcast had ended hours ago, yet a residue lingered, an energy that hummed beneath the walls and hummed beneath their skin. Laya sat alone in the upper chamber, knees drawn to her chest, staring at a spot on the far wall where the light caught a crack in the stone. The crack split upward like an old wound, jagged and unhealed, but still standing. Kane watched her from the hallway entrance, back braced against the doorframe, his hands still smudged with copper grease from the wiring he'd reconnected that afternoon. He didn't want to intrude, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't distance anymore. It was permission. He stepped inside. She didn't move, but her voice came quietly, without looking at him. Do you ever feel like your past is still breathing down your neck, even when there's no one left to carry it? He crossed the room and sat nearby. Not beside her, but close enough that she'd know he was there if she wanted him to be. Every time I close my eyes, he said. Laya turned toward him, the line of her profile half lit by the broken glass window above. You never told me why you stopped composing. Kane let out a slow breath, his eyes drifting across the room. I never stopped hearing. That was the problem. She didn't ask again. She just waited. He reached into the satchel at his side and pulled something out. A small, dented sound chip. The casing was scratched and heat-warped, but the markings were still faintly visible. Opus Veil, he said, turning it over in his fingers. The last piece I ever wrote. She didn't interrupt. It was supposed to be beautiful, he continued. A symphonic grief map. The idea was to layer harmonic frequencies that aligned with common neurological trauma responses. It would take the listener down into sorrow, guide them through it, then bring them out again. Clean. His laugh was bitter. Except it didn't clean. It broke them. What happened? Laya asked. There was a live performance, Kane said. Crowd of almost 400. Midway through the third movement, people began crying. Not quiet tears, sobbing. Some collapsed. One man screamed and clawed at his own face. A woman convulsed and had to be pulled out. One man died. Cardiac failure. Laya's brows drew together. Not in judgment, but in shared ache. They said I weaponized emotion, he went on. Said I had no right to manipulate minds without explicit cognitive safeguards. I was discredited. My work banned. My license revoked. And worst of all, they were right. Not about the intention, but about the effect. He held up the chip between thumb and forefinger. I kept this as a reminder. Not of failure, but of arrogance. I thought I could force healing. But healing can't be forced. It has to be chosen. Laya reached forward slowly and, without asking, took the chip from his hand. She turned it once, twice, the plastic glinting faintly in the light. Then she set it gently on the floor between them, like a shared offering. Do you hate the music? She asked. He hesitated. No, I hate what it became in the wrong moment. But the sound itself, it still lives in me. Laya nodded, and her voice turned inward. My patron used to say my silence was my most valuable trait. A beautiful woman with nothing to say is the perfect diplomatic accessory. That was a compliment. Kane's hands curled into loose fists on his knees, but he said nothing. I was bonded at 10 cycles, she continued, chosen by a selection board for posture, pigment, and passivity. I was trained in gesture and presence. They didn't hit us, didn't scream. They erased us politely. She reached for her own neck, fingers brushing the hollow of her throat. My name wasn't used until I disobeyed. That's when I became a problem. When I flinched during a negotiation or forgot to lower my eyes fast enough. That's when they remembered I was a person. But not in a good way. Her voice grew softer, but more certain. When he was stripped of his title, I was part of his liquidation. A footnote in a list of property holdings. Non-resaleable ceremonial asset. They sold his ships, his estate, and me. She turned to Kane then, fully. I was warehoused, filed under obsolete. They didn't even bother selling me for parts. They just chained me to a beam and walked away. Kane felt something burn in his chest. Rage without direction, grief without anchor. And now, she said, eyes steady, I'm here. Sitting beside a man who listens more than he speaks. Who never once asked me to perform, even when he had every reason to question me. He looked at her, something caught in his throat. I don't need to know more than what I already see, he said. You're not a role. You're not an echo of someone else's story. He reached over, not grabbing, not claiming, just offering his palm, face up between them. Laya stared at it for a long moment, then placed her hand in his. Their fingers didn't interlock. Not yet. But they rested together, warm, grounded. Two voices that had once been used against their, well now, finding harmony not in the loudness of sound, but in the quiet trust of stillness. Outside, Elisavitra sang faintly in the wind. Broken domes shifting, old wires humming. echoes flickering between stone ribs and metallic bones. It was a city still breathing, and for the first time in cycles, so were they. The air in the dome had a charge to it now. Not just static, something subtler, deeper. Like the space itself had begun to expect something. The amplifier hummed faintly behind Kane, tuned low, echoing through the ribbed ceiling with the breath of a sleeping giant. Laya stood at the far edge of the chamber, one hand resting lightly on the transmitter array. Her posture wasn't rigid, but still, not performative, not poised, just aware. She hadn't spoken since Kane explained what the signal spike meant. "They're coming," he had said. Not a question, not a warning, a fact. She nodded once and walked away. Now, she returned, quiet steps over cracked stone. She wore no makeup, no ceremonial robes, only a loose tunic and the same gray trousers she'd worked in the last 2 days. But something in her presence had changed. When she reached him, Kane didn't speak. He simply stepped aside, offering her the console. She didn't take it. "Do you remember," she said, "the first time I ate here?" Kane blinked at the question. "Yeah, you choked. You tried to eat too fast." She smiled faintly. "It wasn't hunger. It was panic. I thought, if I didn't eat fast enough, someone might take the plate away." He swallowed. "No one's taking anything from you." She looked at the console, then back at him. "Then let me say it. In my way." Kane nodded and stepped back. Laya closed her eyes. The chamber fell still. She drew a breath, not just in her lungs, but down to the core of her, like she was inhaling the shape of her own name. And then she spoke. Not loud, not dramatic. Steady. "This is not a message. It's not a performance. I'm not reciting. I'm remembering." Kane watched as her fingers brushed the edge of the transmitter, her voice tightening, not with fear, but with weight. "My name is Laya. I was bred to be background, chosen for symmetry, trained to echo someone else's pride. I was told that silence was grace and stillness was strength. I believed that being seen without being known was safety." Her voice shifted, something raw entering her tone. "But safety was a lie. I was displayed, then discarded, tethered to a pole like a failed sign, marked for sale. Not even as a person, just a thing someone didn't want to bother naming." Kane's chest tightened. Laya stood taller. "But I was watching the whole time. And now I speak not to demand anything, but to remind you that I was always here. You just didn't look close enough." She took a breath, steady and long. "So now I look back." She reached forward and pressed the transmitter's key. The signal pulsed outward, bright and clean. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a crackle. A low, staticky voice broke through the left side speaker. "Station Echo 12 reporting. We hear her. We remember her." Another one followed. Warmer, choked with emotion. She spoke. "You can't unhear her. We won't let you." Then dozens more. Short, long, distant. I knew her from the court days. She walked like music. We archive voices. Hers will stay. Daughter says she wants to be brave like the Red Lady voice. She's 7. Kane turned to Laya. Her hands were trembling slightly. Not with fear, but with something deeper. The weight of finally matching. He approached slowly. "You okay?" She nodded, but tears welled at the corners of her eyes. "Why does it hurt so much to be seen?" He reached for her hand and took it, steadying her. "Because it means you're real, not just useful, and real things leave marks." She squeezed his hand tightly. From the far end of the dome, the old harmonic wall lit up, unexpectedly for the first time in years. Its embedded resonance crystals glowed dimly as the voices pulsed through the system. Each one left behind a flicker of presence. A moment. A signal. "You started something," Kane said. Laya watched the lights, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know I wanted to be remembered. I just didn't want to disappear." Behind them, the auxiliary panel chirped. Kane walked over, checking the display. His jaw stiffened. "What is it?" He turned. Small vessel. Docked near the South Bay. 3 life forms. One of them's armed. Laya's breath caught, but she didn't step back. "Collectors?" she asked. "Worse. Corporate reclamation. No logos. No names. They don't want to arrest anyone. They want to erase the problem. Her lips thinned. Me, and me now. Kane walked to the inner alcove and opened the old audio casing, pulling out two portable broadcast discs. He tossed one to her. She caught it with clean reflexes. I won't run, she said. You don't have to. Not anymore. They left the dome together, stepping into the corridor where voices had once been muted by wealth and power. Now, the stones carried something else. Resistance. Truth. Presence. Laya clipped the disc to her belt and adjusted the volume. Kane grinned. Think they're ready to meet the voice they tried to delete? Laya smirked just slightly. I don't care if they're ready. I am. They walked down the hall side by side. No armor. No weapons. Just voices, hers, his, and those echoing from every duct and panel of the broken station. The storm was coming. But this time, she was the thunder. The collectors were gone. LYSS Vetra, for the first time in what felt like centuries, had chosen to let someone stay. The aftermath didn't come with celebration. There were no cheers or anthems. No dramatic gestures or final lines. Only a long, slow breath. The kind a city might take after waking from a long, haunted dream. Laya stood in the center of the old atrium, shoulders lowered, fingers flexing at her sides, as if trying to remember they belonged to her. The wind carried her hair across her face, and she let it, no longer tucking it away, no longer arranging herself to be viewed. Ken approached quietly, the soles of his boots whispering over dust-layered stone. He didn't speak. There was no need. Her silence wasn't withdrawal. It was rest. Together, they walked back through the halls, through the great corridor where harmonics used to bloom, where now only echoes returned, faint but alive. The city had not been saved. Not yet, but had been claimed. That evening, Kane rewired the last of the dome's upper channels. As he worked, Laya busied herself preparing food from their dwindling supplies. She moved slowly, deliberately, like every gesture now held meaning. When she placed the bowls beside him on the floor, she didn't hand it to him. She simply set it down, an equal offering, not a service. Did you ever think, she asked as he sat beside her, that this place would hold us both? He glanced at her. I never thought this place would hold anything again. She stirred her food, quiet for a moment. Then, almost without thinking, they called it the City of Echoes. Not because of the acoustics, but because everything here was built to remember. Sounds left fingerprints. Footsteps, laughter, voices, every noise layered over the one before. And it stayed, if you listen right. Kane smiled. Then it makes sense that you belong here. Laya tilted her head. Why? Because you carry echoes too, but you don't let them trap you. You answer them. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It sat comfortably between them, like the space left between notes in a song, necessary, intentional. Then her voice came, low and steady. I dreamed once, back when I was still in training, that I was walking through a forest. I never seen one in real life, but I knew what it was. I walked for hours, barefoot, until I found a place where the trees hummed. Kane listened, spoon forgotten in his hand. In the dream, I reached out and touched one, she continued. And the hum stopped. For the first time, everything went still. I thought I'd broken it. But then I heard something else. What? My name. She met his gaze. No one ever said it in my dreams before that. Kane's breath caught. Gently, he set his bowl aside. Did it sound like your own voice? No, she said. It sounded like someone was waiting for me to answer. Outside, the wind rattled against the old dome vents, sending a deep, low whistle through the structure. Kane looked toward it, then back to her. You've answered now, he said. She nodded, but not alone. He reached out then, slowly, clearly, and took her hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. There was no need for ceremony, no need for grand declarations. She didn't flinch when his thumb brushed over the back of her hand. He didn't freeze when her fingers closed around his. It wasn't a moment of surrender or rescue. It was a moment of recognition. Laya shifted, sitting closer, her shoulder brushing his. Will they come again? She asked. Maybe, he said. But now they'll be seen when they do. And they'll hear us. They don't know how to listen. Then we'll teach them. Her head leaned against his shoulder then, and he adjusted slightly so she'd rest more comfortably. They stayed like that for a long while, eyes on the old consoles and light fixtures, the wires that had once carried music across domes, across sectors, across stars. Eventually, Laia spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I was never meant to stay anywhere. I was designed to complement, to be brought out, displayed, admired, then packed away. But now I feel, she paused. Rooted, Kane offered. She nodded, and terrified. What if I break it? What if I get used to this and lose it again? Kane turned to her, his voice quiet and steady. Then we rebuild. Together. A tremor moved through her, not from fear, but from relief. The kind that shakes free the final remnants of a lifetime of bracing for loss. I don't want to be a symbol, she said. I just want to be. He brushed her hair behind her ear, letting his fingers linger briefly along her jawline. Then be here, with me. She nodded once. Then again, slower. I will. The lights overhead flickered, then steadied. Somewhere beneath the floor, an old resonance system kicked in, soft like breath stirring a string. And in that room of dust and wires, where beauty had once collapsed under silence, two people sat shoulder to shoulder, no longer waiting to be seen. They were already heard. The seasons didn't change in HFY, not anymore. But the light did. Not the sun, because there was none. The orbital city hadn't seen real starlight in years. But light still passed through the broken skylights in the upper dome. Filtered through dust and fractured glass, it shifted across the chamber floors in soft gradients of gold and violet. Today, the light felt different. It was warmer, not because of the temperature, but because of the silence that had settled. Not empty, but full. Kane sat on the floor of the old cathedral hall, legs crossed, soldering the remains of a tone panel salvaged from one of the broken bridges. Laia sat nearby, legs tucked beneath her, carefully stringing an instrument built from 3 different species designs. One piece Varelian tension bone, one Terran resonance plate, and her own voice as the final tuning fork. No one had told them to rebuild the city's lost music, but it had started happening anyway. At first, it had been small things. Restoring a single amplifier, repairing broken vents to carry sound properly again, then salvaging instruments, then, quietly, almost accidentally, teaching. Now, once a week, the hall filled with survivors. Children born to silence. Elders who had lived through the station's golden age and then its collapse. Scavengers who couldn't read music but felt rhythm in their blood. Laia guided them through ancient chants. Kane taught them how to listen, not just to notes, but to each other. They hadn't named it a school. It just became one. Sound plates cracked. Kane muttered, holding up the panel. Laia looked over. Again. 3rd time this week. We need to switch to something less mournful, she said, eyeing the instrument. The dome keeps rejecting sadness. He raised a brow. You think it's rejecting it? She tilted her head. I think it's full. Too much sorrow soaked into the walls already. It wants something else. He smiled and returned to work. You think the city wants. I know it does, she said. She wasn't speaking metaphorically. Not anymore. LYSS Vetra had become something else. Something living, not in flesh, but in memory, in echo. And for the first time, it was no longer just a graveyard of forgotten acoustics. It was a place people came toward, not away from. There had even been messages from orbit. The signal Kane and Laia sent weeks ago had traveled farther than expected. A few independent networks had picked it up. One had archived it. Another, faint and crackling, had simply replied with, "We heard. We remember." Today, one of those voices had come home. They arrived just after mid-cycle. A small group, 3 people. One woman in a scarred biosuit, her daughter clinging to her hip. A man with a handheld keyboard strapped across his chest. Their faces were tired, their boots worn, but their eyes were bright. Laia had gone to meet them at the atrium doors, Kane beside her. The woman had bowed her head, not deeply, but with quiet reverence. I was one of the logistics handlers during the clearance. I archived names I didn't know belonged to people. Yours was one of them. Laya didn't speak. The woman continued, voice cracking. I couldn't stop it then. But I came to see you now. To say I'm sorry. And to ask if I can learn. From you. From this place. Laya stepped forward. Not to embrace, not to forgive, but to welcome. You came, she said simply. The woman nodded, and her daughter reached up and touched Laya's red hair, fingers curling around a bright lock. Are you the one who sings to the stars? The little girl asked. Laya smiled, and for the first time in a long time, Kane saw her smile without apology. Sometimes, she said, but only when they listened back. They brought the visitors inside, showed them the rebuilt dome, let them sit, eat, rest. The child fell asleep to the hum of a repaired tone wall, curled beside one of the old resonance columns like it was a guardian. Later, when the hall was quiet again, Kane stood on the threshold and looked back at Laya. She was seated on the stairs, hands in her lap, eyes closed. He walked to her, sat beside her. Their shoulders touched. She opened her eyes, looked at him, and said, I'm not afraid anymore. He didn't ask what she meant. She went on, not afraid of waking up, of being used, of being seen. I didn't think that was possible. He nodded. It wasn't supposed to be, but it happened anyway. He turned to her then, fully. Why did you stay, Laya? After they left. After you were free to go wherever. Her answer came without hesitation. Because for the first time, I'm not surviving someone else's idea of me. I'm building something I chose. This place. These people. You. Kane swallowed. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that day? If I just walked past the billboard? Laya shook her head. I don't believe in if, she said. Only in what is. She turned, one hand reaching for his, fingers weaving between his. And you are. He leaned into her then, forehead brushing hers. No words. No dramatics. Just a soft warmth of shared breath in a place once choked by silence. That night, they stood beneath the dome as a new piece played across the chamber. Not a symphony. Not a polished performance. Just voices. Real ones. Laughing. Stumbling. Creating something imperfect and alive. Kane looked to Laya, and she to him. They didn't say, I love you. They didn't have to. Because love, here, wasn't about words. It was about staying. It was about being seen. And being heard. Together. Forever. The warmth came first, not from the sky, which still filtered pale and fractured light through the upper dome, but from the floor where the heat coils had finally been repaired. It was the kind of quiet warmth that lingered in the stone and made you stretch just a little slower, breathe just a little deeper. Laya stirred beneath the layered blanket, one bare arm curling out across the mattress in search of a familiar presence. She didn't call out. She didn't rush. She simply reached. And when her hand found his, warm, rough, unmistakably his, her fingers closed around his wrist, grounding herself in the certainty that he was still there. Kane murmured something half-formed, half-dream, a sound between a name and a hum. Then he rolled toward her, his chest pressing lightly against her back, arm draping over her waist. His breath was slow, his heartbeat steady against her spine. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When she finally shifted and turned to face him, her red hair fanned across the pillow and caught the light like fire, trapped underwater. Her skin was still faintly cool from the air, but her eyes, soft violet, deep with memory and newness, were warm. Kane blinked at her sleepily and smiled, not with surprise, but with the quiet joy of waking next to someone you know is staying. You were watching me, he said. She nodded, only for a little while. You look like someone dreaming of something good. Maybe I was. She leaned forward and kissed the corner of his mouth. Light, barely a whisper. He didn't chase it. He just smiled wider and ran his fingers through her tangled hair, drawing it back from her face. You keep doing that, he murmured. Doing what? Looking at me like I'm music. She tilted her head. You're music, just the kind most people don't know how to hear. He let out a soft laugh and kissed her then, properly this time. Slow, anchored, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for more, but offered everything. His hand moved to her waist, fingers brushing the soft fabric of her tunic. Her body leaned into his, not urgently, but with certainty. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his, both of them breathing in the same rhythm. "Do you ever wonder," she whispered, "how long this will last?" He shook his head gently. "I don't need to." "Why not?" "Because it's not about forever. It's about today. And I want every one of them with you." She closed her eyes, and he kissed her eyelids. One, then the other, like punctuation marks to a sentence only they understood. The rest of the day unfolded in gentle patterns. They ate together, shoulder to shoulder on the floor by the sun-warmed wall. She laughed when he spilled tea on his shirt, and he rolled his eyes dramatically when she tried to clean it with her sleeve. Later, they walked the length of the inner bridge, her barefoot, him carrying a toolkit and a half-finished radio. She pointed out the old murals along the stone walls, telling him which patterns had once been used to teach harmony to children in her caste. He listened, not just to the words, but to the softness in her voice, the way her past no longer weighed her down, but wove into her present. By late afternoon, they found themselves beneath the western skylight where Kane had installed the sound dish. The sunlight angled in sharply now, hitting the glass at just the right place to scatter 1,000 fragmented rainbows across the floor. Laya stepped into the colored light and turned slowly, arms half raised. "This is the closest I've ever come to dancing," she said. Kane set the radio down. "Then we should fix that." He walked over, took her hand, and didn't lead, just matched her. No steps, no rhythm. Just movement. Just presence. The city didn't hum beneath them this time. It sang. Not in the old structured chords it once used to communicate instructions, but in something freer. Voices from nearby domes joined in faintly. A child's laughter echoed up through a vent. Someone whistled an off-key tune in the distance, and Laya smiled into Kane's shoulder as they moved. And then, without warning, without hesitation, she pulled back, cupped his face in both hands, and kissed him again. This time, fully. This time, with her whole body behind it. Not shy, not symbolic. Just a woman who had been silenced for too long and now had 1,000 words to give, all of them in the shape of this. Kane responded with a sound like a breath taken too late. He wrapped his arms around her and lifted her slightly, her feet rising just off the ground. She laughed into his mouth. He kissed her cheek, her neck, the curve of her jaw where her skin pulsed gently beneath his lips. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his again. "I've never kissed someone just because I wanted to," she whispered. He touched his thumb to her lower lip. "Then we got a lot of time to make up for." The day drifted on, but they didn't mark it with clocks or bells. Just with more touches, more looks, a shared breath over dinner. A song hummed without fear of being heard. And when they curled into each other that night, the lights fading around them, there was no performance. No need to impress. Only this. The rhythm of two people who had survived everything they weren't supposed to, and now, finally, were allowed to simply love.